For me, the greatest motorsport events are road races. They're just so exciting and evocative. Of course, the ones that still exist today are things like the Isle of Man TT. They're generally restricted to 2 wheels. But in the past, there have been some fantastic ones, and arguably none more so than the Targa Florio. It's been wonderful wandering around the pits. This is my first time here. I've always wanted to come here. But of course, I want to go and explore the roads as well, the various courses. And for that, I need a road racer. So here's a new one.
This 200-mile-an-hour hunk of automotive aggression is the Jaguar XE SV Project 8. Developed by Jaguar's own special vehicle operations team, it has 592 brake horsepower, rear-biased all-wheel drive, massive carbon ceramic brakes, Cut 2 rubber, and some serious aero. Don't be fooled by the 4 doors. This is every inch the road racer.
Just have a minute to celebrate the fact that Jaguar has built this car. After years of Rs and RSs, getting our hopes up that they were going to build something properly hardcore, finally they've done it. You might remember there was the XKRS GT, and I suppose this is an evolution of that, but whereas that kind of never really felt fully finished, this is the real deal.
In this spec, the interior has all the road racer ambience you could wish for too. There's the roll cage in the back, complete with obligatory squeaks and creaks. There's the Alcantara wrapped steering wheel that feels soft in your hands, and there's the theatre of the carbon fibre bucket seats, complete with full Sabelt harnesses.
Remember to close the door before you put the harness on.
Of course, it's all very well having all the right exotic ingredients on your limited edition £150,000 car, but they need to add up to more than just a pretty spec sheet. They need to gel and make the driving experience special. So what's it like?
We've got suspension that's 450% stiffer than that in a normal XE. And whilst the ride is certainly firm, I've been really impressed with the damping on this car. The roads on the Targa Florio route, I don't think sections of them have been redone since the race ended over 40 years ago. But when you do hit the bumps, it copes really, really well. The damping is superb on this Project 8. And there's real feel through the steering and the chassis as well. Now some of you might be thinking, well, it's 4-wheel drive. That's a shame. Jaguar doesn't normally go for that. But in a way, I'm actually really pleased, because I was getting a bit bored of Jaguar producing the Rs and RSs that, to be honest, had far more torque than traction. And this 4-wheel drive system, it can send up to 30% to the front wheels, but it's so nicely balanced, so it still feels obviously very rear-wheel drive. And you can turn it on the brakes and then power out of the corner. It's still playful. It just means you can actually use the numbers you've got. The best thing though is the fact that you can really feel how these tyres move around. It's a sort of feeling like seeing 2 little puppies. You just can't help but smile.
What then is not so good compared to other road races such as Porsche's GT cars or BMW's GTS models? Well, the fact that the Project 8 has the ubiquitous Jaguar drivetrain of a supercharged 5-litre V8 mated to an 8-speed ZF Auto is perhaps a bit of a letdown, but there's no arguing with the 516 pounds-foot of torque that it produces, nor the 3.3 seconds to 60 mph time, nor the bombastic noise coming from that titanium exhaust. Of course, this is also a big saloon, not a sports car or coupe, so it weighs 1,745 kilos. As a result, it is certainly a road racer that needs its big carbon brakes, but equally there is something enjoyable and quite amusing about how it manages that mighty mass and the weight transfers. It's a bit like a rhino suddenly being imbued with some of the agility of a lizard.
I've always wanted to come to Sicily. It's always fascinated me, really. Whilst it is certainly like other bits of the mainland, it also has bits of perhaps Mallorca in there too. The landscape, certainly at this time of year, has that bleached look with the They're almost sort of white rocks, like the bones of the country showing through the green landscape.
The roads of Sicily are not conventionally picturesque like, say, those in the Dolomites, but if you understand their history and relish the challenge presented by these pitted and scarred surfaces, then they take on a different but equally enchanting sort of beauty.
Well, these roads are bad. I love the fact that you can use the cambers on corners. I love this sort of driving. I love the fact that there are bumps and imperfections in the surface. Given how this copes with this, certainly wouldn't worry about smashing it at some curbs on a normal racetrack. Because the Targa Florio carried on longer than other races like the Mille Miglia, you had extraordinary cars racing on this. Things like Ferrari 512s. Porsche never bought the 917 here, it settled for the slightly smaller, more nimble 908. But nonetheless, to see this sort of sports prototypes of the 70s racing around here must have been extraordinary. Good gelato. Obviously, today we've had to crawl through the towns and cities. There are speed limits and lots of traffic. But some of the most iconic images from the Targa Florio are, of course, of the race cars going through the towns absolutely flat out. I've been lucky enough to do a few rallies like the Jim Clark and the Manx, and undoubtedly some of the most exciting bits of those are going through towns or villages on closed roads, having the buildings flash past. So today it's been wonderful imagining those race cars of old going through these towns and villages. It's a big part of what makes road racing unique. Jaguar never really had much involvement with the Targa Florio. Perhaps their biggest involvement was actually an absence. In 1955, the Targa Florio, for the first time, was part of the World Sports Car Championship, and Jaguar was in contention to win that. But the last round of the season was the Targa Florio, and Jaguar didn't send a factory team. They left it up to one poor privateer who finished well down the field, meaning that when Moss and Collins won that race, they also took the championship for Mercedes. As such, it almost feels a bit like unfinished business, Jaguar coming back to these roads.
There were actually several different circuits used by the Targa Florio over the years, which are now outlined on various signs dotted next to the routes. The Grande was 92 miles and the Medio was 67 miles, but the most frequently used was the Piccolo circuit. It was 45 miles long and lapped up to 11 times. On a few occasions, the race was even held over one enormous 670-mile lap of the entire island.
But even the little circuit were around 800 corners. To put that in perspective, the Nürburgring only has around 130. Although the Targa Florio was eventually stopped because it was deemed too dangerous, this actually had a relatively low death toll. In its 61 races, less than a dozen people were actually killed. And I think most of that is down to the fact that it is such a twisty course. The fastest average speed was still just under 80 miles an hour. And you look at things like that race in 1955, Moss went off the road and was put back on by spectators. Collins went up a wall and again managed to get going again. Perhaps one of the most impressive things that the team at SVO has achieved with this car is the fact that it still has that involving road racer vibe at low speeds. Like the best cars, you still have feedback through the steering wheel when you're not going quickly. I like the clonks from things like the cage back there and feeling the way that bits of the rose jointed suspension in the rear. You can hear it and feel the fact that it's there. the NVH it's important to this car. It's what brings it alive. It's worth saying that you can spec this car without the cage, the non-track pack version. So you can actually have some rear seats back there, and I think you could use this car. Perhaps some people might bulk it every day, but you could certainly do a lot of miles in it. Have a bit more of a BMW E90 M3 CRT vibe. That's a rare car, a very good one.
I really don't think we could have thrown the Project 8 into a much tougher test than the tortured tarmac of the Targa Florio. Yet it coped with this cauldron of calloused, collapsed and contorted roads far better than I ever expected. It is not a conventional road racer, and it's a shame that it couldn't have been gifted some half-civilised motorsport drivetrain instead of a slightly feral version of an engine and transmission we've seen plenty of times before. But this is a car engineered by people who really understand the interactivity, emotion and feel that a great driver's car should have. From behind the wheel, it is shot through with so much of that oft-craved but infrequently found sense of connection between driver, car and road. In short, it really did feel like it belonged in this beguiling historic backdrop, and I can't wait to see what comes next from SVO. If you've been inspired by our look at the roads of the Targa Florio, then why not click on the link on the left to see some footage from the route of the Monte Carlo rally. Oh, and if you ever do find yourself in a rush with belts done up tight and the door still open, then this is how to get yourself out of a pickle. Just don't do it with muddy shoes.